conversation, we felt like it was important to first frame the conversation. And so we felt like it goes without saying that the pandemic has drastically impacted all of us in profound ways. But something that can't be highlighted enough is the unique and urgent position that many young people find themselves trying to navigate without any maps or precedents to guide them. For the adults, can you imagine what it's like to be trying to get through high school, college, and early adulthood while there is a well-known climate crisis threatening your future? And the gag is that many of us should have been aware of this and taking action, but that's another story for another day. But then thinking about what it's like to be at that age and have to add on a whole pandemic. And so now we have to get even more real and just think about the fact that we know that structural racism has created even more barriers for Black, Brown, and Indigenous youth off the rip. So all the other issues are just compounded on top for them to deal with. And it's because of these understandings, and it's important that to myself and the People's Justice Council that we gave intentional space to hear directly from youth climate activists of color to really check in with how they're sitting with the new realities that we have all been presented with. And so that's the framing that we're going to take for this conversation. And now I'll introduce our panelists. I just realized I'd never introduced myself, so I probably should do that. So my name is Kaleia Martin. I'm the Southeast Climate Justice Organizer for the Climate Reality Project. I also am a youth organizer. I'm someone who's passionate about working with young people and lifting up and amplifying their voices. And I'm just really glad that Reverend Michael reached out to me to help coordinate this panel, because I've got to work with some amazing young people, including most of the young people on this call, and been connected with other young people who are doing great work. So I'm just excited to be here and facilitate this conversation for you all. And without further ado, I will introduce the reason why we're all here, and that's our youth panelists. And so the first person I would like to introduce is Claire. And Claire is a 15-year-old climate justice activist with 0 hour. Wait, can y'all hear me? Oh, it looked like it disappeared. Sorry, y'all. Okay, so back to what I was saying. Sorry, Zoom is giving me issues. It covered up my document. There we go. Sorry about that. So Claire is a 15-year-old climate justice activist with 0 hour and Polluters Out. She was born in Guatemala City, Guatemala, but resides in Richmond, Virginia. Through her work, she hopes to spread awareness about the current climate crisis and empower communities of color and Indigenous peoples. The next person that I would like to introduce is Constanze Knox. Constanze is an 18-year-old graduating senior living in Charlotte, North Carolina. She was a youth leader with an organization called Youth Empowered Solutions, where she trained students across the Southeast on youth leadership and advocacy. She is a co-producer of a documentary called Black Summer 19 that explains the impacts of climate change on people of color in North Carolina. Currently, Constanze is a Climate Action Fellow with the Alliance for Climate Education, where she is working to continue infusing justice within the climate movement. Next, Jeremy Goldsby is an 18-year-old rising senior at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And yes, you heard that right. He's an 18-year-old rising senior in college, so shout out to him. He's also one of the 7 co-founders of an organization called Table 33, which is a grassroots collective that combats environmental injustices through the eyes of Black youth. Jeremy is also a member of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, where he serves all walks of life through brotherhood, scholarship, and service. Next, we have Jorden Revels, who is a Lumbee youth and Indigenous-based environmental justice organizer based in rural North Carolina. They are a Udall scholar in the area of tribal policy and a brother of Phi Sigma Nu Fraternity Incorporated, which is the first and largest American Indian fraternity in the nation. Jorden currently serves as the Grassroots Organizing Fellow at Friends of the Earth US. And last but not least, we have Kaylah, who is the 18-year-old Director of Operations and Logistics at 0 Hour and an organizer with the Sunrise Movement. She currently lives in North Carolina, but was raised in St. Croix, United States Virgin Islands. I hope that I pronounced that right, Kaylah. She has written about the immediate effects of climate change and how frontline youth are not only fighting for their futures, but for their lives right now. She's working to dismantle systems that have created the climate crisis and ensure that future generations can enjoy clean air, clean water, and liberation from unjust institutions. And so these are our panelists who are going to be really guiding us through this conversation. I just want to let people know that this is not a very structured conversation. We wanted it to feel organic and for people to really express what they're feeling in this moment. And if you have any questions or thoughts or anything that resonates with you, we want to hear from you. So please feel free to drop your questions or comments in the chat, and we'll try to respond to as many as we can. And so with that said, I want to open it up to whichever of the panelists want to just jump right in. And my first question to you all is, how has your organizing shifted since the pandemic?
I can go for it. Hey everyone. So my organizing has definitely like dramatically shifted since the pandemic. Like as an organizer with Sunrise Movement, like my local group has been like used to meeting in person and like getting stuff done. And so now like we've switched over to like solely digital organizing, which is like new for that team because we're a local organization. And then with my national org 0 hour, we've also like totally shifted to digital organizing. At the last month of 2019, we got together for a director's retreat and we had planned out our entire 2020. And obviously with the COVID like pandemic, that became sort of like incapacitating in March, I would say. We had to cancel almost like our entire year and like quickly think of like some new campaigns that could still reach out to communities that we wanted to talk to. And so I know like some other folks, you know, have a lot of time, so I wanted to switch that over to like someone else who wanted to talk. But digital organizing has been like what we've moved on to, like thinking of how to like relationship build during a pandemic and still get our work done, and be like safe and healthy.
Thank you.
And I guess my organization, since I work at 0 hour as well, like I can definitely say that it's been like kind of hard just to like learn how to organize in sort of like the digital terrain rather than physical. And I know with Polluters as well, like we were expecting for this to be the turning point for like the rest of the climate movement, and that just like hasn't really, it didn't manifest itself in the way that we wanted it to, and just planning something different that will kind of achieve the same goal has been difficult.
Thank you. I definitely resonate with it, you know, kind of being disappointing that it didn't manifest the way that it was supposed to, but it's just awesome to know that the youth focus groups are taking it in stride. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and I would say with us and a lot of the local efforts with the environmental movement, pretty similar to what Kaylah said, you know, plans starting in March really just got thrown out the window. All the work at all the environmental justice organizations and advocacy groups have been working towards, especially for Earth Day celebrations, it's out the window. A lot of summer programming is out of the window. And I think for probably about a good 2 or 3 weeks, we were just in a state of flux, trying to imagine like, okay, well, what do we do from this point? And it's especially hard when you're looking at rural organizing, where you can't just depend on mass mobilization of people and calling everybody to one center for an action. It's much more of an emphasis on that nitty-gritty, down and dirty organizing. And so what do you do when you don't have the option of that person-to-person connection, especially when you're in a rural setting, it's low income. Technology is not the most accessible thing to people, both as a resource and just as an information barrier. So it's really caused us to have to step back and rethink our assumptions of what it does look like to have somebody involved with activism and building those relationships together.
I would say it's definitely been hard with just joining ACE about 2 to 3 weeks ago. It's like you cannot join that like face-to-face person. You don't get to meet everyone. I remember the first day I joined, the next day we had a seminar with over 84 people on Zoom. So it's just like hard things that you can't do would be better to like be in person with. It's like we don't even know like the next steps that we're going to be doing because of thing with COVID. So yeah.
For me specifically within Table 33, Charlotte, there are two chapters, one on, we call it the national level, which is back home in Eastern North Carolina, and the one at UNCC. Obviously, the one at UNCC has to like go on the back burner because we are not able to meet in person. But on like a national sense, which everyone is involved in, we're just planning right now. Right now, we're thinking about a documentary about the agricultural industry and its abuse and how it affects the environment and climate change as a whole. But other than that, everything had to go in the digital format. Well, it went into digital format anyway because most of the founders are in college. One's at Howard, one's at Campbell, and I'm at UNCC. So we've been communicating digitally ever since May anyway. But now that we do not have the option to meet in person anymore, it has to be like, it's a little difficult and also it's a little hard, especially since most of us are at home. But we're adjusting. We're doing fine, I suppose.
And I also wanted to say, I know Polluters Out, we had our International Day of Action planned for, I think it was like March 10th or 12th. And this was before COVID got really bad in my state, and a bunch of us were at that point where we were like, do we want to go through with this or do we not? And it was a really hard decision because for a lot of us it was our first time planning something that big, and we had like put a lot of work into it, and so it was really hard to make that decision. Do we go forward or do we not? At sort of that turning point where it was not that bad and then it got really bad.
Yeah, it's definitely, what I'm hearing is it's just been really kind of like a shock to each of you, which makes sense because it's been a shock to me too, just trying to figure out, okay, one, like, how do we shift? And like, it doesn't feel good to kind of have to throw out all of your work that you've worked so hard to plan, and it had so much promise. So just thank you all for just being so adaptable in this moment and sharing some of that. And so now, just kind of staying in that vein, I wanted to check in with you on a more personal level to see how this pandemic has personally impacted you and your communities. And so, even though I'm not that much older than you all, I'm out of high school, I'm out of college. And so, I have a hard time conceptualizing what it's like to be someone who I'd say is coming of age during this time. And so I was just wondering if you could share insight for myself and other adults who are just trying to really understand what it's like to be a young person in this moment.
I would say like on like a sort of hyper personal, like online learning is super hard, and I feel like a lot of times like my parents or other adults are sort of dismissive of the stress that young people can have, and it's like, oh well, you don't have to go to work, like you don't know. And realizing that every stress is valid, and it's hard, and like you don't know like what we didn't know at certain point like what the next day would bring. And so having adults realize that even though we experience things differently, that doesn't make it any less than your stress.
Yes, thank you for that. Every stress is valid. I just wanted to say that again because you are absolutely right. Thank you.
Okay, so where do I even begin? Essentially, I decided to not return home to Eastern North Carolina, Dupin County specifically. Most of my family is near the age or above the age of 60, which is a determinant of contracting coronavirus. So as a former, I was all about the health in college. Now that's changed. Knowing that, I decided to stay in Charlotte so I can keep my family safe. And because of that, it's been a little tough. UNCC, I admit, has not really handled the coronavirus well at all. That ensues a lot of changing of dorms, financial issues, still having classes, and professors just not being understanding that their students are human beings as well, and they're going through a lot, and we do not have their finances of being a college professor. And I also did not qualify for unemployment because I worked at Lush, and my location was not available in the in the NC unemployment database. So I was not able to get unemployment. So I'm still living off of that last check that I received in the middle of March. And it's almost the beginning of May, and I'm moving into an apartment. So things are kind of rocky right now. And it's finals week now as well. So like Claire said, everyone's stress is valid. And, my stress is valid right now too. But yeah, I hope my community back at home is doing well. I hope everyone's staying inside because I know that they can be a little stubborn sometimes, but I really hope they're doing well. I'm making phone calls telling people to stay inside and keep the faith. But, I just hope they're actually doing well because being in person and through the phone are two completely different things.
Yeah, and since we're on this
no, go ahead.
Oh,
sorry.
Thank you. No, you're good. Since we're on this little train of thought, I think that I definitely feel more able to validate my anxiety or shifting mental health. At the beginning, I definitely felt very lost and mixed with the feelings of being incapable of solving the climate crisis and making sure the pandemic doesn't hurt folks in my area right now. And now I feel very focused just because my brain works 1% better in times of crisis because I'm always working in crisis mode. And so it's been really interesting being able to navigate that and having all of that on our shoulders. And then yeah, so a little sprinkle of mental health talk in there since we're out there.
So in connection with Jeremy, I am a senior in high school, so it's this is the time that I'm supposed to be having the most fun of my life. It's senior year, you're going to prom, graduation, and right now not having that or not knowing what is next is kind of scary for me because I always look forward to oh my gosh, I'm graduating high school. I get that experience to really just think about my high school experience and going on to the next level. And also with me being a person who lives with my grandmother, who is my primary caregiver, who also is a high-risk person at this time, it's kind of scary because I don't know what things she can contract and might bring home to me. So it's we're both stuck in a situation that is kind of we don't know. And then we're the only two people that lives in the house together. And so we don't have really close people who live around us who might help us with things. So it's just an idea of I don't know. And my anxiety, what you're saying about mental health is through the roof because I'm in a situation of I don't know. And my nana, she likes to control everything. And this is the type of situation where you can't control anything because you don't know what's next or what's out here or who's in the grocery store who has COVID or stuff like that. So it's just kind of I don't know situation. So yeah.
Yeah, I think school has just been rough. This past month has been pretty terrible. There's not much consideration from professors, like Claire touched on, for people who have to take care of family members, who have to go to work, for time differences. A lot of times when you're transitioning to full courses online, it's not always going to work very well for people who either aren't neurotypical or don't have access to those safe and consistent study spaces and good environments to actually learn. It's funny because I actually got an email from a professor last night saying that I am very concerned with the number of missed assignments, including tests and papers, since the class transitioned online. I was like, are you surprised, really? I mean, some professors are even tacking in compensation for not meeting in person, adding on 10 to 15 online assignments a week just for one class. And I wish that was an exaggeration. And I've even heard of one of my friends from Alaska, he goes to school in Indiana now that he's back home in Alaska. He's had to wake up at 5 o'clock just to get on Zoom for a lecture. 5 o'clock in the morning. And there's all these different situations that are going on across the country and across the world. Well, I can't speak for the rest of the world, but across the country where students are being put in these very precarious situations where, honestly, I don't think any of us are really learning anything. We're just trying to get past this point so we can finish out the semester. And on a more personal level within the community, rural communities are always behind the curve, it seems. So it wasn't until just recently where people actually started taking the COVID situation more serious in our community. I think it hit home when it literally hit home and people started contracting cases and they were being tested. So it's constantly a catch-up, a battle like catching up for rural communities, especially low-income ones where, you know, people are stuck in their ways, they're not apt to change, and they don't quite trust anything or everything is said by people who are professionals. And that goes into a whole history of intergenerational trauma, especially with communities of color, and seeing how we've been mistreated over the years and how that's caused distrust and kind of a, I guess what you would say, like us pulling back from trusting these resources that we should, by all means, be able to trust. And as far as being an activist now, it's like we're not just facing one existential crisis where we at least feel like we are having some control of making a change in. Now we don't have that same impact that we want to have. And we're also being basically faced by another existential crisis that's quite literally forcing us to not be able to do anything at all. And so I think for a lot of us, we're really going through it. It's definitely been tough times, especially not being able to go out and having that young sense of, I'm going to go take on the world, I'm going to go change it into a better place. So it's definitely been a battle just trying to get through this and find ways to adapt and change the way we go about approaching these topics.
Thank you. There's so much to everything that you all said. I started making a list because I'm like, Kaleia, you're not going to remember all of these things. But, you know, first just wanted to go back to Jeremy and just thank you for sharing such a personal story of like how this has impacted you. I can't even imagine what it's like to be trying to figure out like where you're going to live without access to like the resources you need to like secure a place to live, and all the while your professors are emailing you about their impending final exam. And going back to what you said, Jorden, about your professors not really understanding that this crisis isn't happening to people in a bubble and that y'all are human beings who have things going on. So I just want to just lift up the point that you're making about understanding that yes, it's important for people to still be getting their education right now, but I do think I personally have not spent enough time questioning what is the realistic expectation around learning and what should we even be teaching in this moment for young people. So just thank you for that. And also just want to acknowledge that you all have lifted up this great point around mental health and anxiety, and just wanting to lift that up and acknowledge that that is real, and grateful for you all to just be willing to talk about mental health, and hoping that anyone who's listening on the call is doing the best to take care of themselves during this time. And if you need support and resources, please feel free to reach out to people in your community, to reach out to us, and we can definitely do our best to find resources for you all. And so before we moved on, I wondered if anyone else had any other thoughts that they wanted to add on while we stay kind of on this topic around more personal impacts and how it's impacted your communities.
The only thing I have to say is that these course evaluations are due soon. They gonna get it.
Okay, I feel that. They forgot about those, huh? So I'm looking to see, we don't have any questions.
Kaleia,
oh, go ahead.
Kaleia, there is a topic in the chat that was asked to be discussed, and it came from Susanna Tuttle. And it says, we are all being told to trust the science with regards to understanding when society can reopen. And yet we know from the climate emergency that the science has not been changing hearts and minds to take action. She says she would love to hear your perspectives on this.
Yeah, so I've been hearing a lot of like trust that, you know, politicians have like our like safety in mind when they're like telling us like reopen society. But it's really interesting how like various nations have implemented like life-saving measures like rent freezes, like mortgage freezes, finance packages, universal health care, and then like America has not like taken the initiative to like protect like Black folks, low-income communities, Indigenous folks, and other marginalized folks who are being hit first and hardest by this like pandemic. And so like when I'm thinking of like what post-COVID recovery will look like if we were to like trust the science, like reopen right now. And it looks like we're on track to prioritize like corporations who like want to make money during a pandemic and not like literally the health and safety of like people. And so I'm not sure, like, I don't know, someone can jump in if you feel like, I trust like what's true. Obviously, like you need to understand like how different folks are experiencing like unique conditions under the pandemic. Black folks are experiencing like structural racism, some like negative effects of racism in the medical field, like housing discrimination laws put us at more risk for having like chronic illnesses. And so like when we like do want to reopen society and like have people like go back to work and put essential workers at risk, like that's not helping anyone but those who like own those businesses and are like able to put money in their pockets. So those are my quick thoughts on it.
Thank you for that. It's kind of, I guess what I heard you saying, and please correct me if I misinterpreted, it sounded like you were kind of making a distinction between trusting the science and trusting the people who are, I guess, interpreting the science, like our leaders. Because that's what I heard you saying, and I do think that's a really important distinction to make, because it can be argued that the science is not telling us to reopen, but then it's a question of, well, if our politicians have our best interests in mind and they're getting the same information and telling us to reopen, do we trust them or not? So yeah, thank you for making that distinction.
Kaleia, I have another topic here from Reverend Brendolyn Bozeman. And she says, I truly appreciate you raising the issues of mental health. Please let us know how we can help you and or provide resources for you. And I know she was speaking to one person in particular, but let's see if we can't raise that for everybody. Looking at those who are you all, and hearing your stories about you being out of school and the stressors that it has caused, how are you all coping, one? And how do you see your peers coping in this present time?
I feel like, especially like if you're a parent, I think it's important to realize that like maybe every assignment isn't the end of the world. And if you like want to take a break, then that's like great. And I know that personally, since like my schedule is a little more free now, I've decided to take Fridays off from like schoolwork. So I have that flexibility, and like if you can, like letting your children like watch a movie, like everyone's gonna cope in a different way, and sometimes watching a movie is the best way.
Yeah, I agree with coping. For me right now is just watching TVs, having conversation with different people. For me, the best way is just talking about things, or not talking about the situation that's going on right now, because I know talking about things that's going on in the world kind of gives me more anxiety. It's like more stressful. It's like, what can I do? Because as my personality, I want to help, but it's like, what can I do right now in this situation? Because I'm kind of enforced to stay at home, not to do really nothing. So I just say watch movies, do the best you can, try not to get stressed over with like work, because right now for me it's so unsure as a graduating senior this year. It's like, oh, you don't have to do your work, but then do your work. So it's very unsure, but make sure you stay on top of things that you know that you have to stay on top of.
For me, just talking with friends and a lot of Animal Crossing. Animal Crossing is a video game that's on the Nintendo Switch. It's really fun. It's really calming. It's really soothing. So just wanted to preface that. It helps a lot. But just talking with friends, I'm very grateful and blessed to have friends that are still willing to talk, because I know for all of us, we're all going through something. That's something that we came together before COVID, before all this everything crazy started happening. We have come to a conclusion hey, we're all going through, we all came from places, we all went through some stuff before we got to UNCC, and we have that mutual respect for each other. And I'm very blessed to have that group of friends that we want to keep in touch and want to make sure we're doing. And my frat brothers, we're always clowning each other, talking to each other, keeping our spirits high. I don't regret joining my frat, because without them, I know I would have been in a much worse place than I am right now. And one of them ships off to Japan in a few days, and we can't meet in person. However, we're still gonna party and celebrate through FaceTime, because brotherhood comes first, and brotherhood is what's keeping us, all of us, afloat, really. And I'm very blessed to have that resource provided to me.
Great, thank you.
I feel you on that. I was going to touch on it real quick.
No, go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
I feel you on that, Jeremy, because Animal Crossing was definitely my only form of solace for 2 weeks. The only thing keeping me going for a good brief time. But definitely keeping in touch with a lot of friend groups, a lot of circles that I've been involved with. So, for example, with my UDAL scholars, we have a class of 50. So every other week, we get together and have a wine night. We all decompress, talk about everything that's going on. It's really affirming and validating to be able to talk to fellow scholars who are all in a similar situation. We had this crazy situation going on with our college, our professor here being like this. It's really nice to just know that we're not the only person who's going through it. And to know that we have support systems in place for people who are willing to be there for us and allow the same to be done for them. And so, in a sense, it's kind of brought a lot of long-term, or rather the long-distance connections closer, which is really nice for me and for other people, because you get to learn more about each other and you get to develop those relationships. And that's kind of the compensation we get for not actually being able to see people in person, be with them, hug them, and have a good time. So it's definitely been an interesting time, but it's also been very connected at the same time.
And what I find interesting and kind of ironic about what all of you said, because I feel like you all touched on the same fundamental things around staying connected by way of social media. And I just find it interesting because, the stereotypes about your generation is that you're so disconnected from people because all you do is stay on your phones and get on social media. You know how older folks like to rant about that. So I just find it, ironic and really beautiful that you all have been able to still have those connections during this time. And it seems like it's been working really well. I know it's worked well for me. But just kind of being able to take something that is seen as a negative stereotype of this generation and really use that for self-care, for maintaining your sanity during this time. So I just wanted to lift that up as kind of like a ha-ha to all the older folks who used to complain about being on your phones all day.
All right, now, whatever. I'm just messing with you. Listen, Amy Adams asks, she says that I often find that when things feel chaotic, I get frustrated, and frustration often shows up as anger. What are you feeling angry about, and how are you handling that anger?
Oh wait, did you want to go?
Oh yeah, you go ahead, Claire.
Oh, okay. I know one thing that really made me angry was that the Trump administration deported a flight of migrants back to Guatemala many of them tested positive for COVID-19, and they sent them back even though they knew they had COVID, to my home country of Guatemala. And so knowing the effect that'll have on Guatemala, which is a really poor country and very indigenous, and the effect that will have on those communities made me so mad. And I feel like anger is really valid, and that sometimes you can use anger to your ability and to let it radicalize you. We've talked a lot about that, Kayla. Just finding a way that you can help out, maybe donating, or I know that Guatemala relies a lot on tourism, especially for some like Mayan artisans. And so finding a way that maybe you can buy some of their products knowing that they might not get a lot of money for the next couple months. And so finding something productive you can do with that anger.
For me, I wouldn't say anger would be the word, because I've like kind of put myself in a place. First of all, everyone's anger is valid. I am not taking anything away from anyone, but like I've like found myself in like a solace place of just like, you're so angry that you're peaceful. And that's where I'm at right now. I'm like at peace, not with everything that's going on, just with myself. And likewise with what Claire said, I am Afro-Latino. Like my grandfather's straight from Cuba. So seeing like all these Latin American countries still getting like that xenophobia, the racism, just like from the United States, even though the United States is in a terrible position already because of the Trump administration. And it just like, how can you be so hateful toward a group of people when they have done nothing to you and they're seeking solace within this country for different reasons, yet you're still having that hate in your heart to where you're refusing people who want to get help, who need to get help? It blows my mind. That is all. Or that's not all, but that's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, I definitely just wanted to like lift up what you both said. That was really like powerful. I also like am like just constantly like passively angry. It's like it's always like simmering there. Like I always know I'm supposed to be angry and I always am, but like this year has just been like crisis after crisis after crisis. And so I've kind of just like been like dissociating a bit. I'm like, okay, like let me just do my work. Because that's like all I can do right now. And that brings me like a bit of peace. But like being like actively angry is just really exhausting for me. And so I've been like just channeling that into like organizing.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there's this one quote from the first Avengers movie from Bruce Banner where he's about to go into a fight and he's like, well, that's my secret. I'm always angry. And I think that's kind of like a reoccurring thing, especially now, seeing all the failures of this administration to handle this issue and just the widespread impact that it's had on people across the United States, especially on the low-income Indigenous Black communities where we don't have the resources we need to handle this stuff. And the aid that we're supposed to be receiving sometimes doesn't come at all, or comes in such a minuscule amount that it was almost better off that we didn't receive anything to begin with. So, for example, with the Navajo Nation, they're currently facing tremendous issues with COVID-19. And their cases and the deaths that they've had on the reservation has far exceeded some per capita estimates of states within the United States. Like, that's pretty bad considering it's just the reservation. So a lot of these situations and the failings and mishaps and the way that the government has gone about putting profits over people has me living, honestly. And I want to have faith. I want to have hope that they're going to make the right decision to put people first. But time and time again, that does not happen. There's no reason why all these corporations should be getting these huge bailouts and billions of dollars when there are people who are quite literally dying and suffering. Corporations that have no essential attributes or necessity to people are somehow receiving all this money. And we know why that's happening. It's pretty obvious, but it's just it's a consistent thing. And I'm trying to utilize this anger and this frustration as fuel to do more, to educate more, to engage more people, and to try and get people to rethink and reimagine their original perceptions of what society is like and how it should be operating. Because a lot of times people are like, man, why is that happening? It's like, I don't know, man. Like, maybe let's look at it. Let's break it down and let's see. Like, I'm not going to try and force you to think this way, but I'm just going to plant the seed and hope that you do something with it and you nurture it.
For me, I'll say, I try not to let myself get too angry because I feel like once I'm there, and it's hard for me to go down. And I just feel like I'm in a house. There's nothing for me to like release that anger. So I try not to let myself get there anymore. So I'm trying to stay as most peaceful as I can. But what's really making me angry is that a lot of people are not really taking this situation seriously, especially for younger people. They think this, is a time for a break. I don't feel like this is a break, especially with me living with my grandmother, who is 65 years old and who already has underlying health issues. So she's higher risk than most people. People are thinking, if you die, you die. But for me, it's not that situation. Like, I feel like, who am I going to look up to? Because my grandmother is my everything. So, like, it's like, who am I going to have after COVID-19, if she does get it, or like what can happen to her? So it just angers me that a lot of people don't take this serious, and it's just hard for me to deal with that right now in this situation.
Yeah, that's real. And Constance, let me say that I could tell from the first time we met that when you get angry, you're the only one that can calm yourself down. I knew that when we physically saw each other for the first time.
Rev, I can second that from firsthand experience. That is accurate.
Yeah, it's
really hard. Because we are live, I had someone to text me a question to you all, and it came from Sarah Shore. She says, question for the panel. What do you think this pandemic can teach you about how to deal with the climate crisis? As youth, what do you want to see change? What better practices as a society can you imagine?
Is everyone good with me going first? Okay. I'm sure that we've seen a little amount of photos from different places across the world. Specifically, I think I saw LA a few days ago about the smog just starting to like dissipate. I don't know if y'all have seen that, but I'm like, the earth is healing because we are not, or we shouldn't be outside. We shouldn't be doing our daily normal functions. The earth is literally healing. And if that in itself doesn't wake people up, then I don't know what will. Because all the stuff that we are supposed to be doing is happening on a quicker level. And, it's obvious. And yesterday was Earth Day, and I saw something on Twitter. It's like deal with religion and stuff like that, specifically Christianity. It was like, God put you on this place, this earth to live, and why not take care of your home? And that kind of resonated with me because I'm like, dang, like, and you literally see that earth is literally healing itself, and we are now forcibly giving it time to, come back together again as it's supposed to be when it was first formed. And I was like, that's something to really think about. And those that are like denying climate change, like, you have no excuse anymore because you can see it. Earth is literally healing itself. And whenever life does go back on, when it continues to go back to, it's never going to go back to normal. First of all, normal will no longer exist ever because COVID will literally change all of our lives. But whenever the new sort of normal comes about, they'll see that it's either going to get worse, or people are going to realize that, stuff, it's avoidable. It's just avoidable. That is all.
I feel like also a lot of people are spending more and more time outside because that's like our only like place to be out in the world, and just like reconnecting with what many people forgot was there. And also just like realizing like the indigenous wisdom of like some things like are priceless. Like the earth is priceless and we can't put a price on this earth. And so going back and connecting with the land is really important. And I think people more and more realize this as the pandemic goes on and we rely on nature more and more.
Thank you for those answers. I'm going to ask actually two more questions, but I'm going to make those back to back, and then we'll summarize. And Kaleia, get ready because I'm going to let you summarize and give the last word. Dan Figgins asks, does the work of each of you on climate change make appeals to the science or to the effects of climate on future generations? And I guess another way of asking that, and I'm hoping I'm not getting Dan wrong, or maybe I can even say I'll piggyback on that and ask a follow-up question. What motivates you to do this work? So is it the effects on climate that you deal with from a science point, or is it that you care about future generations? But either way it goes, I guess the ultimate question that's being asked is, what motivates you to do this work? And I would like for each of you to answer that if possible. And then Kaleia, it's on
So we'll
you.
keep it like short. So like we have to all keep it short because we have a little bit of time. But like I fight for like Black women. I fight for like young women like me. I fight for like other immigrants. And like I'm in this fight because like the people that like are around me are the people who are being hit first and hardest by the climate crisis. Appeals to science just don't feel like personal to them when they're worried about structural like systems affecting their lives. And so like I got into this movement like because I like wanted to like help out like other like immigrants, like blah blah blah. And so like the science side of the climate crisis has just never been a motivator for me because it never motivated me. Like I love chemistry, y'all, but like I'm not in here because blah blah blah. I think you learn that like as you go, and then you're able to like prove to people like why this thing exists. But like I'm here to like fight the fossil fuel industry. I'm here to like fight capitalism that is like totally unsustainable and like incapable of like being safe and like prioritizing the health of folks. And so like I'm here like for the people for sure.
I'd say for me personally, there's a connection when I was actually an intern with Amy, who's in the chat. When I was on the river one day, it made me realize that it's more than just the environment that we're fighting for. It's inherently the communities, the cultures, the histories, and the traditions that we have as Native peoples. It's all tied in with the environment. You know, everything's interconnected, and that if we don't fight for this, if we don't try and save these resources, then they're going to be lost forever. And so for me, it's my job to carry on the work of ancestors who have fought and struggled to get us where we are today, honestly, to give us the rights and privileges that we had to fight for over generations. It's, for me, part of me becoming an ancestor and making sure that future generations are going to have access, going to have the ability to use the same resources to hold on to their cultural traditions, ways of living, and most importantly, their well-being. Make sure that their health isn't going to be negatively impacted by all these issues and the climate crisis. And at this point of the fight, I think it's about mitigation and trying to do whatever we can to help mitigate these issues, not only for our own communities, but for all communities.
I always knew my personality and my voice was so strong that I can help other people. And I know that I can do this for myself, but I want to do it for other people. And joining Yes back in 2017, I knew that I wanted to change it for the better of myself. And also doing Black Summer 19, it opened my heart and my mind that this is not just for me, this is for my people. I'm doing this for Black and brown communities. People need to know the situation that goes on besides of white folks and capitalists and all things like that. It's just like, we have problems that people don't want to see it. And for people like me who have a voice, I want to speak up for them. So, yeah.
I know for me and my organization, Table 33, it took us almost like drowning from Hurricane Florence to like, not wake up because we knew that this stuff was going on. We were doing our own like protective measures for ourselves, but the community was not. And we saw a lack and we're trying to fix that in a sense. Excuse me. But it took us almost like dying from Hurricane Florence to like, finally take a stand. And that was in late 2018. I know personally I was without water or safe water from September when it hit, which was my birthday weekend, all the way up to New Year's Day in 2019. That's like 3 months of some change of not having clean water. And then we went to Climate Reality Summit in Atlanta that coming March, and that's whenever Table 33 was formed. And we've been being very persistent activists ever since. We've accomplished a lot and stuff like that. But I don't know if you would classify that as science. I would not classify it as science. I just like classify it as like real life, like it being like real. Science is real, but like you're living through it. You almost die from it, and you're finally starting to take a stand for it. And science comes along after that, and now we have the facts to back our stances up, and now we're implementing.
I feel like for me as well, like I'm in a point of privilege compared to those in Guatemala or indigenous communities, and it's my responsibility as someone who has the means and the way to speak up for our community and to speak up for the people most affected. And so I think that's what motivates my response and my activism, is that I can and I will for my people.
Thank you. Again, just so much that I want to just lift up in everything that you said. There was so much wisdom, and I think the overwhelming consensus was that science really came along to just validate what your hearts and lived experience had already showed you was going on. So to whoever's question that was about the science, I think what we heard was that the science is not the catalyst for this work. It's what we do. We add along to our movement work to, I guess, validate it for the people who question our lived experience. And being a person of color, oftentimes we have to have supplemental resources to prove that what we're experiencing in the world is true. And so that's what the science is used for. And I hope we get to a point where we don't have to have the science in order to be believed when we say that this is happening to our communities. But I just think it's really beautiful. Each of you, talked about, Jorden, you talked about the fact that at this point, we're not solving it, like we're mitigating the impacts and doing our best we can to keep our traditions alive. We're doing this for our people, for the folks who look like us. Constance, you said you are using the voice that you already knew you had because you knew that other people might not know that they can use their voice. And then Jeremy, you just talked about it being a literal life or death experience for you. And so just wanting to lift up all of the things that you said, and also Kaylah, you talking about doing it for Black women and other people in your community. So just wanting to lift up all of that and make sure that people really heard you all to say, like, the science is cool, but that's not why we get into the work. And it seems to me that that's not, if we want to get people of color into this work, science is not the best way to do that. So just understand, like, when you're messaging and reaching out to folks who are trying to pay their rent and get clean water and have cleaner air, don't talk to them about the 1.5 degrees Celsius off the rip. They can know about that stuff later, but you need to make sure that you're bringing your messages down to real life for people so that they can resonate and understand how what you're saying is impacting them in the immediate, because there are a lot of other issues in our community that are also impacting us. And so we have, around 3 minutes left, and I just want to thank all of you for being willing to share your stories and your wisdom and your insight, and wanting to acknowledge that everything you've said here has been so valid and so true. And I've learned a lot just from listening to you. So I appreciate you for letting me moderate this panel and be a part of this discussion. And I really want to turn it back to you all for the last 2 minutes. If anyone has any last burning thoughts or things they want people to hear before we sign off, I'll leave it to you all, because y'all have definitely blown this thing out the water. Rev, this is definitely the best panel. We knew it would be, but this is it.
I think just some words to leave everybody with is that I believe personally that this moment can either cause us to sink and drag us down, or it can actually elevate us towards some more change in our society. So I would ask for the participants in this call, as well as the panelists, allow this moment to reshape you and help you reimagine what society could look like in a post-COVID environment.
Mm-hmm.
One for me is this is specifically to white people. When you say you don't see color, that is probably the most offensive thing that you could possibly say, because when you say you don't see color, it means that you don't see people of color, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. It is beyond offensive, because when you don't see color, you don't acknowledge your privilege that you do have from birth. So think on that.
Thank you.
I guess I would say really quickly that we're still watching. Like, I know there's a pipeline that's going to be pushed through in my state, and like, I'm still watching and I'm still organizing. And just because I can't be there physically, I'm still organizing and I'm going to fight this.
Thank you, Claire. We're fighting with you, definitely. Constance, did you have any last thoughts?
No, I didn't, but thank you for calling me. I just want to say that this was really an open experience. I really enjoyed listening to everyone and connecting with everyone. This really made me think about different line of things, and I'm glad to take that back with me.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being on with us today. Everyone who took time out of their schedules, you could be doing anything else in the world, but you came to be on our panel with us and just listen to our voices. So I just want to thank you and honor you for that commitment. I look forward to continuing these conversations and to connect with each of you. And please feel free to reach out if you want to connect with any of these amazing young people, because they're doing great work. And as adults, we have to step up, but actually step out of the way as well to make room for their leadership. So thank you.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you all
Bye.
for being on.
Thank y'all.
Guys.
Thank you all. Awesome panel, you all. Awesome. Awesome job.
That was it. That was it.
Y'all rock that. Seriously. Yeah. Y'all did it for the culture.
What do we do now?
You could jump off unless y'all want to stick around and talk.
I'm